There's some stories that are just so big, so embedded in our culture that we kind of stop actually reading them.
Right. We just know the nursery rhyme version.
Exactly. The nursery rhyme version. And I think Noah's Ark is probably the biggest victim of this. I say Noah's Ark, and you immediately picture the giraffe sticking its neck out of a window.
The two elephants, the dove, the rainbow.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a decoration for a baby's room. It's supposed to be comforting.
A fresh start, safety.
But I've been going through the source material we have for this deep dive. And I have to say, the text that comes right before the flood, it is not a story for children.
Not even close. I mean, if you actually read the setup, the preamble, it's terrifying.
It really is. It reads like some kind of crossover between a cosmic horror story and a high fantasy epic. We're talking about a hybrid giants, divine heartbreak.
And a psychological profile of humanity that is just absolutely chilling.
It's so dense.
It is. And, just to be clear for everyone listening, to get the full picture, we are going laser tight today on Genesis chapter 6.
Just a few verses.
Just verses 1 through 8. And we're using the King James Version, really, as our anchor because that language, it just captures the weight of it all. This is the why. This is the problem statement that makes the solution, the flood, necessary.
And see, that's what struck me. We always skip straight to building the boat. But these 8 verses, they explain why the world had to be washed away. And it wasn't just, people being rude to each other. It was something fundamental.
It's so much stranger than most people remember, but it's also incredibly structured. It paints this picture of a world where all the boundaries are just collapsing.
What do you mean by boundaries?
The line between the divine and the human, the barrier between order and chaos, it's all just dissolving.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We start right at the top, verse 1.
Yeah.
And it seems to begin normally enough. And it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them.
Right, simple demographic.
A population boost.
Exactly. But notice the scale. Men began to multiply. We are so far from the garden with just 2 people. Humanity is sprawling and implies civilization is scaling up.
Okay.
But that expansion, it brings visibility. And that's where things take a really sharp turn in verse 2.
This is where that high fantasy element kicks in for me. Verse 2 says, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose.
We have to pause on those labels, sons of God and daughters of men.
Yeah.
The text creates this very deliberate binary.
It almost feels like 2 different species, or at least 2 different classes of being.
Exactly. In the ancient context, sons of God, the Hebrew is B'nai Elohim. It's a term that, it creates a lot of debate, but usually in the Old Testament, it refers to divine beings.
Like angels.
Angels or celestial entities of some kind. And daughters of men is clearly human women. So the text is describing a crossing of that cosmic line. The distinctness between heaven and earth is being violated. See, that's the part that gets glossed over. It's not just men and women getting married. It's something other. And look at the verbs, the actions in that sentence. It does not sound like a romance novel. They saw, they took.
It's predatory. You're right to pick up on that. It's a sequence of consumption. Saw leads directly to took.
Right.
There's no conversation recorded, no courtship, no consent. It's a pure assertion of power. They took them wives of all which they chose. It suggests a total lack of restraint.
It really feels like the first domino falling. The text presents this as a major violation.
It is a violation of order, and we know it is because of the immediate reaction in verse 3. The narrative doesn't even take a breath before the Lord steps in.
And that reaction is fascinating. It's not lightning bolts. It's not an immediate apocalypse. It's a statement about biology and time. Verse 3. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh.
That word strive is doing a lot of heavy lifting there.
Strive, that implies a fight, right? Or a struggle of some kind. A tension, a conflict. The text paints this picture where the divine spirit is essentially propping humanity up, sustaining them, but there's resistance. And the reason given is,
for that he also is flesh.
He also is flesh.
That sounds like a diagnosis. Like a doctor looking at a chart and saying, I'm sorry, the condition is terminal.
It is a diagnosis. It's contrasting spirit, the animating divine force, with flesh, which in this context means mortality, weakness, animal instinct. The Lord is basically saying, I am not going to keep battling to sustain this creation forever. If they want to be flesh, fine. Let them be flesh.
And then comes a sentence that has confused people for thousands of years. Yet his days shall be 120 years. So I have to ask, is this a countdown clock? Is God saying you've got 120 years until the flood, or is this a biological cap on the human lifespan?
Well, it's one of the great debates of this text. But if you connect it to the bigger picture, the previous chapters, remember, people were living for centuries.
All right, Methuselah, Jared,
Yeah,
the long-lived patriarchs.
exactly. These guys were living 900 years. It was an era of just ancient longevity. But here, right after this corruption is identified, we get this number, 120.
Huh.
So this verse, it reads like a biological rewrite. A hard cap is being put in place. You are flesh, so you get a fleshly lifespan.
That's a heavy concept.
Mm.
The idea that our fleshiness, our corruption, literally shrank our horizon. We lost our longevity because we couldn't handle the spirit.
It's a shrinking of the entire human experience. The corruption of the moral state leads directly to the limitation of the physical state. The text is linking our biology directly to our behavior.
Okay, so we have the lifespan cap. But then, just when you think you're getting the timeline, verse 4 just drops a bomb. And this is the part I think surprises people the most when they actually go back and read.
Verse 4 is the blockbuster moment.
There were giants in the earth in those days. Giants. Just casually thrown in there.
The Hebrew word is Nephilim, and it's a word that evokes, awe and terror.
And the text explicitly links them to what just happened. It says, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. So, are we supposed to understand these giants are the offspring, the biological result of this boundary crossing?
The text certainly places them as the result, cause and effect. You mix the sons of God with the daughters of men, and the output is something unnatural, something literally larger than life.
But listen to how they're described. This is what trips me up. The same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. Men of renown. That sounds respectful almost, like they were celebrities.
Oh, they were absolutely celebrities. Renown means they had a name, Shem. They were the heroes of the age. But this is where you have to be very careful with the text. Just because the world called them men of renown doesn't mean the text thinks they were good.
So it's a contrast. The world sees mighty men, but God sees.
Huh. God sees the fruit of a forbidden union. These men of renown, they represent power without any kind of moral grounding. They're the ultimate expression of flesh dominating the earth. They might have been the kings and warriors of that era, the ones that everyone looked up to.
The ones who had statues built of them?
Exactly. But in the logic of this story, their very existence is a symptom of the disease.
That is such a crucial distinction. We often equate famous or powerful with favored. We think, oh, look at that successful person. They must be doing something right. But here, the men of renown are part of the corruption that's about to be wiped out.
Precisely. Their fame was a sign of the times, but the times were evil. And if you want to know what the true state of the world was beneath the celebrity culture of the giants, you just look at verse 5. And this, to me, this is the darkest verse in the entire Bible.
Yeah. This is the pivot. We go from the external, the giants, the population growth, to the internal. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth.
That's the assessment. But keep reading. It gets surgically specific about human psychology.
And that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually.
I mean, I want you to really grapple with the absolutes in that sentence. The text isn't saying, people made some bad choices.
No.
Or society was getting a little rough.
It says every
imagination, total scope.
Of the thoughts of his heart.
The deepest motivation, the core of the operating system, not just the surface actions, but the subconscious drive.
Was only evil.
Only. No mixture, no gray area, no... He means well.
And continually.
All day. Every day. Nonstop. It paints a picture of a total cognitive collapse. The human mind, according to this text, had become a factory that produced nothing but evil.
That's terrifying.
Yep.
It suggests an inability to change. If every thought is only evil, you can't even conceive of doing good. It's like a virus completely rewrote the human code.
Which explains why the solution had to be so drastic. If the corruption is that total, you can't just teach people to be better. You can't send a prophet to give a lecture. There's nothing left to work with. The hard drive is corrupted. And that realization leads to verse 6. And I think this verse shocks people even more than the flood itself.
Verse 6. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart.
Repented. The King James uses that word. In modern English, we might say regretted.
That is a massive theological curveball. The Creator regretting the creation, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Like a mistake was made.
Yeah.
Like he's saying, I shouldn't have done this.
It's an anthropopathic description ascribing human feelings to God to help us understand the gravity of the moment. But the emotion is real. It's not an, oops, I messed up the math. Look at the second half of the verse.
And it grieved him at his heart.
This is the key. The text focuses on grief.
So it's not rage.
That's the common misconception. We think of the flood as God getting angry, losing his temper, and smashing the toys. But the text says grieved. It's the pain of a broken relationship. It's the sorrow of a parent seeing a child turn into something unrecognizable.
You know, there's a poetic parallel there, too. In verse 5, we saw the heart of man full of evil imaginations.
Right.
And in verse 6, we see the heart of God full of grief.
Precisely. The evil heart of man breaks the heart of God. And that is the emotional context for the judgment. The destruction isn't an act of tyranny, it's an act of sorrow. It's a funeral.
So because of this grief, because the corruption is total, we get the verdict in verse 7, and it is final. And the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth.
The Hebrew word, therefore, destroy, it implies blotting out, like wiping a dish clean, or really uncreating.
But the collateral damage is immense. The list includes both man and beast and the creeping thing and the fowls of the air. Why the animals? I mean, what did the creeping thing do to deserve this?
It just shows how interconnected the ancient worldview was. Humanity was the steward of creation. We were the head of the household, so to speak. And when the head falls, the whole house falls.
Wow.
The corruption of man was so toxic, it infected the entire biological order.
So the earth itself was polluted by this.
Yeah.
This flesh.
Right. If you think of Genesis 1 as building the house, putting up the walls, adding the... Genesis 6 is the decision to tear it down to the foundation because of black mold. You can't just scrub the walls. The whole structure is compromised.
And the reason is repeated again at the end of the verse. For it repenteth me that I have made them.
The regret is total. I mean, if we stopped reading at verse 7, this would be the bleakest story in human history. A failed experiment, a grieving creator, a total wipeout.
It's a tragedy.
It is a tragedy, a horror story where the monster wins because the monster is us.
But
Yeah.
we have one more verse, verse 8, just one sentence, 7 words in the text I have here. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord.
That word, but.
Yeah.
It is the pivot point of the entire history of the world in this text.
But Noah.
In a world where every imagination was evil, there's an exception.
Now, does the text say Noah was a man of renown? Was he a giant? A mighty warrior?
Not at all. And that is the critical contrast. The giants had renown. Noah found grace.
Let's dig into that word grace. We hear it a lot, but what does it mean right here?
The Hebrew is chen. It means favor, unearned favor. It doesn't say Noah earned a paycheck.
Yeah.
It says he found grace. It implies a relationship. It implies that amidst the sea of flesh, the corruption and the giants and the violence, there was one person still connected to the Spirit.
So the men of renown, the celebrities, the powerful ones, they get destroyed. But the man who finds grace gets saved.
That's the algorithm of the text. Renown is a trap. Grace is the lifeline. And that single verse turns the story from a tragedy into a suspense thriller.
Yeah.
Because now we know destruction is coming, but there is one lifeboat.
It really reframes the whole flood narrative for me. We usually think the story is about the rain, but based on this preamble, the rain is just the final step. The real disaster had already happened.
That's the takeaway. The world didn't end when the water started rising. The world ended back in verse 5, when the human mind became only evil continually. The flood was just the cleanup operation.
Wow.
A cleanup for a spiritual disaster that had already taken place.
It is just amazing how much why is packed into this preamble. We went from cosmic boundary violations to the rise of giants, to the collapse of the human mind, to divine heartbreak, a sentence of death, and then finally to a single point of hope.
It's a complete narrative arc in just 8 verses.
And it makes you look at the solution, the ark, so differently. It wasn't just a boat ride. It was a quarantine chamber designed to carry that one spark of grace through the decreation.
Exactly. The only way to preserve the spirit in a world completely consumed by flesh.
There's one thought I want to leave the listener with today. We talked about that 120-year limit back in verse 3.
Right.
The text seems to suggest that our biology, our literal lifespan, is tethered to our moral state.
Because man was flesh, his days were numbered.
Yeah. We tend to think of our bodies as just machines that run until they break, independent of who we are on the inside. But this text argues that spiritual corruption literally eats away at our vitality.
It's a profound thought. If the flesh represents weakness and the spirit represents life, then choosing the flesh is literally choosing death. The 120 years is just the visible evidence of that internal choice.
You can't separate your biology from your biography.
According to this text, no, you can't.
That is a lot to process. But that's why we do this, to find those nuggets you miss when you just see the nursery rhyme version.
Always more to uncover.
And in a world that is still so obsessed with men of renown, influencers, celebrities, giants of industry, it's worth remembering that when the rain started falling, the only thing that floated was grace.
Renown sinks. Grace floats.
I like that. We'll leave it there. Next time you see a picture of the ark, remember the giants, remember the grief, and remember the grace. Thanks for diving deep with us.
It was a pleasure.